He looked at my boarding pass, laughed in my face, and called the police. He thought he was protecting his plane. But he was actually ending his career. Ladies and gentlemen, you won't believe the audacity of what happened on Flight 8 and 12 to London. A veteran airline captain, blinded by arrogance, decided that a black woman sitting in seat 1A simply didn't belong. He didn't just ask her to move. He humiliated her, stopped the flight, and called federal security to drag her off. But Captain Sterling made one fatal mistake. He didn't check who signed that boarding pass. When the truth came out, the silence in that cabin was louder than a jet engine. Get comfortable, because the karma that hits this pilot is going to leave you breathless. The air inside the first-class cabin of Monarch Airlines Flight 8 and 12 smelled of expensive leather and conditioned oxygen. It was the scent of exclusivity, a scent Dr. Vivienne Clark had grown accustomed to, though she never took it for granted. She adjusted the cuffs of her charcoal blazer, smoothing the fabric over her wrists, and settled into seat 1A. Outside the window, the tarmac of JFK International Airport was a sprawling grey ocean under the biting November rain. Inside, however, everything was warm ambient lighting and soft jazz. Vivian placed her leather briefcase under the seat in front of her. She wasn't just tired, she was exhausted. The merger had taken 6 months of sleepless nights, endless negotiations in Zurich, and more coffee than any human heart should have to tolerate. But it was done. The deal was signed. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the soft thud-thud of passengers boarding behind her. "Excuse me, ma'am." Vivian opened her eyes. Standing in the aisle was a flight attendant, a young woman with a name tag that read, Sarah. Sarah looked nervous. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her pristine navy blue uniform. "Yes?" Vivian asked, offering a polite, tired smile. May I see your boarding pass, please?" Sarah asked. Her voice was barely a whisper, her eyes darting toward the galley where the cockpit door stood slightly ajar. Vivian frowned slightly. She had already shown her pass at the gate and again at the plane door. "Is there a problem, Sarah?" No problem." Sarah stammered, her face flushing pink. "It's just standard protocol for this row. We just need to verify the manifest." Vivian reached into her breast pocket and pulled out the thick gold-embossed card. It wasn't the flimsy thermal paper most passengers held. This was heavy stock printed with a specific QR code that didn't just denote a seat, but a status. She handed it over. Sarah took it, her eyes widening as she saw the code VIP000. She didn't scan it. She just stared at it, then back at Vivian, then at the card again. She looked terrified. "Thank you, Dr. Clark," Sarah breathed, handing it back with a trembling hand. "Can I get you some champagne before takeoff, or perhaps sparkling water with lime?" "Sparkling water would be fine, thank you," Vivian said, taking the card back. Sarah scurried away toward the galley, looking like she had just defused a bomb. Vivian watched her go, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. Sarah's reaction wasn't normal. It was the reaction of someone who was acting under orders they didn't agree with. Vivian glanced toward the cockpit. Through the partially open door, she saw the back of a head. Silver hair perfectly coiffed, broad shoulders epauletted with 4 gold stripes. The captain. He turned slightly, his profile sharp and rigid. Captain Richard Sterling. Vivian knew the name, though she had never met the man. He was Monarch Airlines' golden boy, a 30-year veteran, the face of their recruitment posters, and a man rumored to be as difficult as he was skilled. Sterling's eyes met hers through the gap. They were cold, steely blue and devoid of any warmth. He didn't nod. He didn't smile. He stared at her for a long, uncomfortable 5 seconds, his gaze sweeping over her braided hair, her dark skin, her business attire. Then he sneered, a subtle, barely there curl of the lip that screamed more than any slur could. He turned back to his instruments and slammed the cockpit door shut with a force that rattled the galley wall. Vivian exhaled slowly, her grip tightening on the armrest. She knew that look. She had seen it in boardrooms, in medical schools, in high-end real estate offices. It was the look that said, "You are an anomaly. You are an error in my system." She took a sip of the water Sarah brought her, trying to wash away the bitter taste of anticipation. She hoped she was wrong. She hoped the flight would just push back, take off, and land in London without incident. But as the boarding music faded and the fasten seatbelt sign pinged on the cockpit door opened again, Captain Sterling stepped out. He wasn't wearing his hat. He walked into the cabin with the heavy, purposeful stride of a man coming to take out the trash. The murmur of the first-class passengers died down. Everyone sensed the shift in atmospheric pressure. He stopped right at row 1. He didn't look at the passengers in 1B or 2A. He looked directly down at Vivian. "Ma'am," Sterling said. His voice was a deep baritone, projected loudly enough for the entire cabin to hear. It wasn't a question. It was a command. "We have a discrepancy with the manifest." Vivian looked up, keeping her face perfectly impassive. "I believe your flight attendant just checked my pass, Captain." "Sarah is new," Sterling said, his voice dripping with condescension. "She often misses the details. I need to see your ticket. Now." The cabin was silent. A man in 2C lowered his newspaper. A woman across the aisle paused with her drink halfway to her mouth. Vivian held his gaze. "Is there a reason you are singling me out?" "Captain Sterling, did you ask the gentleman in 1B for his ticket?" The man in 1B, an older white gentleman with a mustache, looked uncomfortable and shrank into his seat. Sterling's jaw tightened. A vein throbbed in his temple. "The gentleman in 1B isn't sitting in a restricted priority seat, ma'am. Seat 1A is reserved for airline executives and high-clearance diplomatic personnel. Now, unless you are the Queen of England in disguise, I suggest you hand me that ticket so I can rebook you in economy, where there is space." The insult hung in the air like smoke. He hadn't just questioned her seat. He had told her where he thought she belonged. Vivian slowly reached into her pocket again. She didn't hand him the ticket. She placed it on the center console between them, the gold lettering glinting under the reading light. "Check it," she said calmly. Sterling didn't even look at the text on the card. He snatched it up, his face reddening. This is a printout. Anyone can print high stock card at Kinko's." He waved the boarding pass in the air, like evidence of a crime. "This is fraudulent. You're holding up my aircraft." "Captain," Sarah intervened, stepping forward, her voice trembling. "Sir, I scanned it. The system accepted." "Quiet, Sarah," Sterling barked, not looking at her. He leaned in close to Vivian, invading her personal space. "Listen to me. I don't know how you got past the gate agents. Maybe you slipped them $100. Maybe they were asleep. But on my ship, we follow the rules. This seat is 12,000. You are not flying in it." Vivian unbuckled her seatbelt. The sound of the metal click was sharp. She stood up. She was tall, nearly eye-level with him in her heels. "Are you refusing to fly with me in this seat, Captain?" she asked, her voice steady, loud, and crystal clear. "I am refusing to transport a passenger with fraudulent documents," Sterling declared, playing to the audience of listening passengers. "It's a security risk. For all I know, you're here to cause a disturbance." "I see," Vivian said. She reached for her phone. "Put that away," Sterling snapped. "No phones during active flight prep." "We aren't active, Captain. We are parked," Vivian replied coldly. "I am recording this interaction for my own safety." Sterling's face went from red to purple. His authority was being challenged in his own kingdom. He turned to Sarah. "Call the gate. Tell them to get airport security and the federal liaison on board immediately. I want this passenger removed." "Sir, please," Sarah begged. "Do it!" Sterling roared. Sarah flinched and ran to the interphone. Vivian sat back down, crossed her legs, and looked Sterling dead in the eye. "You better hope you're right, Richard, because if you bring the police onto this plane, there is no turning back." "I never turn back," Sterling spat. He turned on his heel and marched back to the cockpit, leaving the door wide open so he could watch her. The cabin erupted in whispers. "Can you believe her?" someone whispered behind her. "I don't know, he seems really aggressive," another voice countered. "She probably used miles and the system glitched," a man said dismissively. Vivian stared straight ahead. She didn't look at her phone. She didn't look at the passengers. She waited. 10 minutes passed. The air in the cabin grew stiflingly hot. The delay was eating into the schedule, and passengers were getting restless. The baby in row 4 started crying. Vivian remained a statue. Inside her heart was hammering against her ribs, a mix of adrenaline and old, deep-seated trauma. It wasn't the first time she'd been accused of being in the wrong place. It happened at the hospital where she was chief of surgery. It happened at the country club her father founded. But this was public theater. Heavy boots thudded on the jet bridge. 3 officers boarded the plane. 2 were standard TSA airport police heavy-set men with grim expressions. The 3rd was different, an air marshal wearing a tactical vest over plain clothes. Captain Sterling emerged from the cockpit immediately, a triumphant smirk plastering his face. He pointed a finger at Vivian. "That's her," Sterling announced. "Seat 1A. Refusing to vacate. Possession of a forged boarding pass. Belligerent behavior." The air marshal, a man with grey buzz-cut hair, named Officer Miller, stepped forward. He looked tired. "Ma'am." Vivian looked up. "Yes, officer. The captain has requested your removal from the aircraft. By federal law, the pilot in command has the final say on who flies. I need you to grab your things and come with us." "On what grounds?" Vivian asked. "Disruptive behavior and ticket fraud," Sterling interjected from behind the police. "She's holding a fake pass." Officer Miller looked at Vivian. "Ma'am, let's not make this harder than it needs to be. We can sort out the ticket issue at the podium, but right now you need to deplane." "I have a valid ticket," Vivian stated. "If I leave this plane, I am admitting to a crime I didn't commit." "If you don't leave this plane," one of the uniformed police officers said, resting his hand on his belt, "we will have to physically assist you, and you will be placed under arrest for trespassing." Vivian looked at the 3 men towering over her. She looked at the passengers, many of whom now had their phones out, recording the crazy lady who wouldn't listen. She saw the smirk on Sterling's face. He was enjoying this. He was relishing the power trip of putting her in her place. She knew she couldn't win physically. If she resisted, she would be just another statistic on the news. Violent passenger subdued. "Fine," Vivian said softly. She stood up. She picked up her briefcase. "Good," Sterling said, crossing his arms. "And make sure you check her bags in the hold. God knows what else she's smuggling. Vivian paused. She turned to Sarah, the flight attendant, who was now crying silently in the galley corner. "Sarah," Vivian said gently, "do not worry. You did your job." Then she looked at Sterling. "Captain, I am complying with the authorities. But I want the record to show that I offered you my ticket for verification 3 times, and you refused to scan it." "Get off my plane," Sterling sneered. Vivian walked down the aisle. It felt like a mile long. The eyes of the other passengers pricked her skin. "Finally," someone muttered. "So entitled," another whispered. She walked onto the jet bridge, the cool, damp air hitting her face. The officers flanked her, treating her like a fugitive. They marched her up the ramp, back into the terminal, right to the gate podium. The gate agent, a man named David, looked confused. "What's going on? Why are you bringing her back?" "Captain kicked her off," Officer Miller said. "Said she has a fake ticket." "Fake," David frowned. "I scanned her in myself. It cleared the highest security level." Sterling, who had followed them to the door of the plane to ensure she was gone, shouted down the jet bridge. "It's a system glitch. David, override it and delete her from the manifest. We leave in 5 minutes." David looked at the computer screen. He typed in Vivian's name. His face went pale. All the color drained from his cheeks. He stopped typing. He looked at the screen, then at Vivian, then back at the screen. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "David," Officer Miller asked, "is it fake?" David shook his head slowly. No, it's not fake." He looked at the police officer with wide, panicked eyes. "You need to call this captain back here, right now." "He's prepping for takeoff," the officer said. "I don't care," David shouted, his voice cracking. "Stop that plane. Do not let flight 812 push back." "Why?" the officer asked, annoyed. "Who is she?" David turned the monitor screen around so the officers could see. The profile for Dr. Vivienne Clark was up. But it wasn't a passenger profile. It was an administrative profile. The background of the screen was red, a security clearance level reserved for top-tier personnel. Under her name, in bold, capitalized letters, was her title, Owner and Chairman of the Board Monarch Global Holdings, Majority Shareholder. Status: do not deny boarding under any circumstances. There was a long, heavy silence at the gate podium. Officer Miller looked at Vivian. She was standing there, calm, adjusting her blazer, waiting for them to catch up. "You—" Miller started, his voice dropping an octave. "You own the airline. I acquired the majority stake this morning," Vivian said, her voice cool and sharp as a scalpel. "I was flying to London to announce the restructuring of the executive team and to evaluate the current staff culture." She looked back down the jet bridge, where Captain Sterling was likely buckling himself in, thinking he had won. "It seems," Vivian said, a dangerous glint in her eye, "that my evaluation is complete." The atmosphere at Gate 42 shifted instantly. The dynamic of power didn't just turn, it flipped violently. The uniformed officers stepped back suddenly, looking like children caught breaking a vase. Officer Miller, the air marshal, took his hand off his belt and clasped his hands behind his back, adopting a posture of extreme deference. "Dr. Clark," Miller said, clearing his throat. I apologize. We were acting on the information provided by the pilot in command." "You were acting on bias provided by the pilot," Vivian corrected him. "You didn't check the ticket either." "We will rectify this immediately," David, the gate agent, said, typing furiously. "I'm calling the cockpit. I'm telling him to hold." "No," Vivian said, raising a hand. David stopped typing. "Ma'am?" "Don't call him," Vivian said. A slow, cold smile spread across her face. "He thinks I'm a security threat. He thinks I don't belong on his plane. Let's treat this with the severity he requested." She turned to Officer Miller. "Captain Sterling claimed I was a security risk and that I possessed fraudulent federal documents. That is a serious accusation, isn't it?" "Officer." "Yes, ma'am. It's a felony." Miller nodded. "And making a false report to federal agents to delay a flight and harass a passenger. That is also a violation of federal aviation laws, is it not?" Miller saw where she was going. He nodded slowly. "Interfering with the duties of a crew member, or in this case, misusing federal resources." "Yes." "Good," Vivian said. "I want to reboard, but I don't want to just sit down. I want Captain Sterling to explain to me, in front of the passengers, he just performed for exactly why he removed me." She looked at David. "Is the regional director at the airport today?" "Mr. Henderson." "Yes, he's in the lounge," David said. "Get him, and get the airport police chief. I'm not getting back on that plane alone. We are going to have a board meeting, right now, in the cabin." 10 minutes later. Inside Flight 812, Captain Sterling was annoyed. The jet bridge hadn't retracted. The ground crew wasn't communicating. "What is the hold-up?" he barked into his headset. "I kicked the problem off. Let's go." "Captain," the co-pilot, a younger man named Evan, said hesitantly. "Ground says there's a manifest correction. They need to reboard a passenger." "What?" Sterling ripped his headset off. "I told them to rebook her. I'm not letting her back on." Suddenly there was a commotion at the front of the plane. The passengers who had settled down started murmuring again. Sterling stormed out of the cockpit. "I swear to God, if that woman is—" He froze. Walking down the aisle wasn't just Vivian. Leading the way was the chief of airport police. Flanking him was Mr. Henderson, the regional director of Monarch Airlines, looking pale and sweating profusely. And behind them, looking calm and regal, was Vivian. Sterling blinked. "Mr. Henderson, what is this? Why is she back?" Henderson didn't look at Sterling. He couldn't. He looked at the floor. "Captain Sterling," Henderson said, his voice shaking. "Please step out of the cockpit." "I am out of the cockpit," Sterling said, confused. He pointed at Vivian. "This woman is a security risk. I gave a direct order. Captain Sterling." The police chief's voice boomed. "Step aside." Vivian stepped forward. The entire first-class cabin was watching. The economy passengers were craning their necks. The silence was absolute. "You asked for my ticket, Captain," Vivian said, her voice projecting to the back of the cabin. "You said I didn't look like I belonged in seat 1A. You said I must have forged my pass." She held up the gold card again. "You were right about one thing. This isn't a normal boarding pass. It's an owner's proxy." Sterling frowned, his arrogance wavering slightly. "Owners? What?" "I am Dr. Vivian Clark," she said. "I own Monarch Global Holdings, which means, Captain Sterling, I own this plane. I own the fuel in the wings. I own the seat you are standing in front of. And I own the contract of employment you signed 30 years ago." The color drained from Sterling's face so fast it looked like he had been slapped with a bag of flour. His mouth opened, but his vocal cords seemed to have paralyzed. I, Vivian continued, "am the person who signs your checks, or rather I was." The passengers gasped. A collective "ooh" went through the cabin. The guy in 2C, who had ignored her earlier, dropped his newspaper. Mr. Henderson, Vivian said, not taking her eyes off the pilot. What is the company policy regarding a pilot who racially profiles a passenger, files a false police report, and delays a flight due to personal bias? Henderson swallowed hard. Immediate suspension pending investigation, Dr. Clark, with recommendation for termination. Vivian nodded. She looked at Sterling. He was trembling now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the terrified realization of a man watching his pension, his reputation, and his life implode in real time. But I didn't. I was just checking security. Sterling stammered, his voice weak. I didn't know it was you. If I had known. That war, Vivian cut him off, is exactly the problem. If I were anyone else, you would have gotten away with it. You didn't respect the passenger. You only respect the power. And now the power is removing you. She pointed to the cabin door. Get off my plane, Mr. Sterling. The silence in the cabin was so profound that the hum of the auxiliary power unit seemed to roar. Captain Richard Sterling stood frozen in the aisle, his face a mask of disbelief and rapidly dawning horror. For 30 years his uniform had been his armor. The 4 gold stripes on his shoulders were his crown. Now, under the withering gaze of Dr. Vivian Clark, they felt like heavy lead weights dragging him down into the abyss. I asked you a question, Mr. Sterling, Vivian said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. Are you going to leave on your own, or do I need to have Officer Miller assist you, just as you intended to have him assist me? Sterling's eyes darted around the cabin. He looked for an ally. He looked at the passengers he had preened for earlier, the wealthy elite in row 1 and 2. The man in 1B, the one with the mustache who had chuckled when Sterling first confronted Vivian, was now intensely interested in the safety instruction card, refusing to make eye contact. The woman across the aisle was filming her phone camera, pointed directly at Sterling's face. Dr. Clark, Sterling rasped, his voice cracking. Let's be reasonable. I have a flight to command. We are already behind schedule. If I leave, this plane is grounded. You'll cost the airline, your airline, thousands of dollars in delay fees. The crew is prepped. I am the only captain on board. He was trying to leverage his utility. He thought that profit would outweigh dignity. It was a miscalculation. Vivian took a step closer. You think I care about the delay fees? I just spent $4 billion to acquire this fleet, Richard. I will ground this plane for a week if it means cleaning out the rot. She turned to Mr. Henderson, the regional director, who was wringing his hands so hard his knuckles were white. Mr. Henderson, do we not have a reserve captain on standby at JFK, a hub of this size? Yes, ma'am, Henderson squeaked. Captain Miller, no relation to the officer, is in the crew lounge. He can be here in 20 minutes. Call him, Vivian ordered, and tell him he's getting a promotion. She turned back to Sterling. You are relieved of duty, effective immediately. Please collect your flight bag and vacate the flight deck. Sterling didn't move. His ego wouldn't allow it. You can't do this. I have union rights. I have seniority. I'm going to file a grievance so big it will bury you in paperwork for a decade. You can't fire me for a security check. I was doing my job. You weren't doing a security check, Officer Miller interjected, stepping forward with his handcuffs now dangling loosely from his finger, a subtle threat. You were profiling, and when the passenger offered proof, you refused to look at it. That's not security, Captain. That's harassment. Go get your bag, Richard, Vivian said. Don't make me ask the officers to drag you out. I imagine that video would go viral faster than the one being recorded right now. Sterling looked at the phone, pointing at him. He realized finally that he was cornered. The color in his face shifted from pale to a blotchy, angry red. He let out a guttural noise of frustration, spun on his heel, and stormed back into the cockpit. The sounds from inside were not gentle. The passengers heard the slamming of lockers, the zipper of a heavy bag, and the distinct thud of a clipboard hitting the wall. Inside the cockpit, First Officer Evan stared at his captain. Evan was young, only 28, and had spent the last 6 months walking on eggshells around Sterling. "Captain," Evan started. "Shut up, Evan." Sterling snapped, shoving his headset into his bag. "She's a witch. A vindictive witch. She set me up. She sat there on purpose just to trap me." "Sir, she's the owner," Evan whispered. "And you didn't scan her ticket." Sterling stopped. He looked at his co-pilot, seeing the lack of sympathy in the younger man's eyes. "You're on her side, after all the hours I logged signing off on your training." "I'm on the side of flying the plane, sir," Evan said, turning back to the flight management computer. "I need to reset the flight path for the new captain." Sterling grabbed his bag. He felt betrayed by everyone. He marched out of the cockpit, chest heaving. He had to walk the full length of the first-class cabin to get to the exit. It was the longest walk of his life. This was his walk of shame. As he passed seat 1A, Vivian didn't even look at him. She was already on her phone, typing an email, completely dismissing his existence. That hurt more than any insult. She had already moved on. But the passengers hadn't. "Good riddance," a woman in row 3 muttered loud enough for him to hear. "Bully," someone else whispered. Sterling reached the cabin door. He looked at Sarah, the flight attendant he had screamed at earlier. She was standing by the door, her eyes red-rimmed, but her chin held high. She held a trash bag for collected cups. Sterling paused, expecting her to move out of his way. Sarah didn't move. She stood her ground. "Excuse me," Sterling snapped. "The bridge is clear, Mr. Sterling," Sarah said, emphasizing the lack of title. She gestured to the door with a coolness he had never seen in her. He stepped onto the jet bridge. The cool air hit him again, but this time it felt cold and lonely. Officer Miller and the airport police chief followed him out, flanking him, not as protectors, but as escorts to ensure he left the premises. "Mr. Sterling," the police chief said as they walked up the ramp, "we will need to take a statement regarding the false police report, and you'll need to surrender your airport security badge. You're no longer authorized for the secure side of the terminal." Sterling stopped. "My badge? But how will I get to the lounge?" "You won't," the chief said. "You're being escorted to the curb. You can call a taxi." Back on the plane, the atmosphere decompressed instantly. It was as if a vacuum seal had been broken. Passengers started talking, exhaling, shifting in their seats. Vivian finished her email and looked up. She saw Henderson standing there, looking terrified. "Mr. Henderson," she said. "Yes, Dr. Clark. Anything you need. Get the reserve captain here, and authorize a round of compensation vouchers for every passenger on this plane. $500 for economy, £1, $500 for first class. Apologize for the delay and the unpleasantness." "Immediately." Henderson nodded, pulling out his tablet. And Henderson, "Yes. Make sure Sarah is the purser for this flight. I want her in charge of the cabin." Sarah, overhearing this from the galley, covered her mouth with her hand. The purser role was a senior position, usually requiring 10 more years of tenure. "Consider it done," Henderson said. He hurried off the plane to manage the crisis. Vivian sat back. She closed her eyes. Her hands were shaking slightly. She hid them under her blazer. It wasn't fear, it was the release of rage. She had held it together, played the chess pieces perfectly, but the indignity of it still burned. She took a deep breath, centering herself. She had a company to run, and the first order of business had just been concluded. 40 minutes later, the new pilot, Captain David Miller, boarded. He was a stark contrast to Sterling younger, smiling, breathless from running through the terminal, and incredibly polite. He introduced himself to the passengers over the PA system with a warm, apologetic tone, never mentioning the specific reason for the crew change, simply citing operational adjustments. The plane pushed back. The engines whined to life. Flight 812 to London was finally airborne. Once the seatbelt sign pinged off the dynamic in the first-class cabin, shifted into something bizarre and almost comical. Vivian had her laptop open, reviewing the spreadsheets for the London merger. She was working, but the people around her were performing. The man in seat 1B, the moustache-wearing gentleman who had previously shrunk away, leaned over the aisle. "Excuse me, Dr. Clark," he said, his voice dripping with synthetic charm. Vivian didn't look up from her screen. "Yes, I just wanted to say, bravo back there. Truly. That man was out of line. I was just about to say something myself before you revealed who you were. Terrible behavior. Just terrible." Vivian stopped typing. She slowly turned her head to look at him. Her expression was unreadable. "You were about to say something?" she asked. "Oh, absolutely," the man lied, smoothing his tie. "I have no tolerance for that sort of thing. My name is Arthur Penhaligon, by the way. I run a hedge fund in Canary Wharf. We actually invest heavily in transportation. I'd love to pick your brain about your vision for Monarch." He extended a card. Vivian looked at the card, then at his face. She remembered clearly that when Sterling had threatened to arrest her, Arthur Penhaligon had picked up his Financial Times and pretended to read an article about interest rates. "Mr. Penhaligon," Vivian said softly, "I appreciate the sentiment. However, I seem to recall that when Captain Sterling asked if he should check your ticket, you were quite relieved he didn't. Silence is a choice, sir, and you made yours on the ground." She didn't take the card. She turned back to her laptop. Arthur's face went crimson. He pulled his hand back as if he'd been burned, sinking deep into his seat. He didn't speak for the rest of the 7-hour flight. The rest of the cabin took the hint. They realized that Dr. Clark was not interested in sycophants. She was not there to be networked with. She was the predator in the room, and they were lucky she wasn't hunting them. However, the service was impeccable. Sarah moved through the cabin with a newfound confidence. She wasn't just a flight attendant anymore. She was the chosen lieutenant of the owner. She served Vivian's meal, roasted duck with a cherry reduction, with the precision of a royal butler. "Is everything to your liking, Dr. Clark?" Sarah asked quietly, as she poured a glass of vintage Bordeaux. Vivian looked up and smiled a genuine warm smile that transformed her face. "It's perfect, Sarah. And please, when it's just us, call me Vivian. You stood up for me when I was just a passenger in 1A. I won't forget that." Sarah lowered her voice. "I was scared, ma'am. Sterling, he's been a bully for years. He writes up anyone who disagrees with him. He got my friend fired last year for wearing her hair too curly. We've all been terrified of him." Vivian's expression darkened. "He got someone fired for their hair." "Yes, he called it unprofessional geometry. HR sided with him because he's a senior captain." Vivian took a sip of wine, her eyes narrowing. "Write down the name of your friend, Sarah, and the name of the HR representative who handled that case. Slip it into my bag before we land. You You'd look into it. I'm not going to look into it, Vivian said. I'm going to fix it. This is a new era, Sarah. The dinosaurs are going extinct. Sarah beamed, a look of pure relief and vindication washing over her. She scribbled the names on a napkin and discreetly placed it on Vivian's console later. As the flight crossed the Atlantic, the cabin lights dimmed. Vivian reclined her seat, but she couldn't sleep. She looked out the window at the stars hanging in the ink-black sky. She thought about her father. Marcus Clark had been a mechanic for a commercial airline in the 1980s. He was a brilliant man, capable of fixing a turbine engine with his eyes closed. But he was never promoted to management. He was always passed over for men who looked like Richard Sterling men, who had the right look, the right connections, even if they had half the talent. Marcus had died 3 years ago, leaving Vivian a small life insurance policy and a lifetime of advice. Viv, he used to say, don't beg for a seat at the table. Buy the building the table is in. Then they have to listen. She had taken that literally. She had gone to medical school, invented a biotech patent that revolutionized cardiac surgery, sold it for billions, and then started her acquisition spree. Monarch Airlines was her father's old employer. Buying it wasn't just business. It was a ghost story. It was retribution. She touched the cold glass of the window. I got him, Dad, she thought. I got the man who made you feel small. The flight was smooth. Captain Miller flew the plane with a gentle hand, announcing the descent into Heathrow with a cheerful professional demeanor. Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our initial descent into London. The weather is a brisk 50 degrees with light rain. On behalf of myself and Dr. Clark. He paused, acknowledging the owner. We thank you for flying Monarch. We know you have a choice in airlines, and we are honored you chose us. As the plane taxied to the gate at Terminal 5, Vivian's phone, now connected to the local network, began to buzz incessantly. She checked her notifications. The video had leaked. The passenger across the aisle had posted it to TikTok and Twitter. The caption read, "Pilot tries to kick off. Black woman finds out she owns the airline. Mahat Karma. Monarch Airlines. Boss move." It had 4 million views in 6 hours. The comments were a landslide. The way his face dropped priceless. Who is she? I want to work for her. Fire that pilot into the sun. Monarch stock is going to go wild tomorrow. Vivian watched the video. It showed Sterling sneer his arrogance, and then the crushing moment of realization. It was ugly, but it was the truth. As the plane parked at the gate, the door opened. But this time, it wasn't just the ground crew waiting. Standing at the end of the jet bridge was a phalanx of suits. The London executive team of Monarch Airlines had assembled. They looked like a firing squad, awaiting their commander. In the center was the CEO of Monarch Europe, looking as if he hadn't slept in a week. Vivian stood up, smoothed her blazer, and picked up her bag. "Sarah," she said, stopping at the galley. "Yes, Vivian. Take the rest of the week off in London. Company expense. Stay at the Savoy. I'll need you fresh for the return flight." Sarah's jaw dropped. The Savoy. But that's... Enjoy it, Vivian said with a wink. She walked out of the plane. The moment her heel hit the jet bridge floor, the executives straightened their spines. "Dr. Clark," the CEO, a man named Jeffrey, said, stepping forward with a nervous smile. "Welcome to London. We saw the footage. We have already drafted a press release distancing ourselves from Captain Sterling's behavior." Vivian didn't stop walking. She breezed past them, forcing the entire group of 10 highly paid executives to scramble and jog to keep up with her. "A press release is words, Jeffrey," she said, staring straight ahead as she walked toward immigration. "I'm not interested in words. I'm interested in the systemic failure that allowed a man like that to hold power for 30 years. I want his personnel file on my desk at the hotel in 1 hour. I want a list of every complaint ever filed against him. And Jeffrey, yes, Dr. Clark, I want the names of the people who ignored those complaints. Because by tomorrow morning, Captain Sterling won't be the only one looking for a new job." The group of executives exchanged terrified glances. The storm hadn't passed. It had just made landfall. 3 days later, the storm had not dissipated. It had organized into a hurricane. The setting was the executive boardroom of Monarch's London headquarters, a room of glass and steel overlooking the Thames. It was a cold, grey morning matching the mood inside. This was not a standard disciplinary meeting. This was a Level 1 Operational Integrity Tribunal, a procedure rarely invoked, usually reserved for plane crashes or massive embezzlement. At the head of the long mahogany table sat Dr. Vivian Clark. She wore a cream-colored suit that made her look radiant against the gloomy London backdrop. Flanking her were the company's general counsel, a sharp-eyed woman named Eleanor Vance, and the newly appointed interim VP of HR. At the other end sat Captain Richard Sterling. He looked terrible. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow, sleepless look of a man who had spent 72 hours reading thousands of strangers on the internet, calling for his head. Beside him sat his union representative, a bulldog of a man named Frank O'Connor, and his personal attorney, Simon Leclerc. "This proceeding is on the record," Eleanor Vance stated, tapping a tablet. "We are here to review the employment status of Captain Richard Sterling following the incident on Flight 812. "Objection to the premise," Frank O'Connor grunted immediately. "This wasn't an incident. It was a security protocol. Captain Sterling has the federally mandated right to question any passenger he deems a risk. The fact that the passenger turned out to be the owner is irrelevant to the safety protocol. You are persecuting a pilot for doing his job." Sterling straightened up, emboldened by his rep. "Exactly. I didn't know who she was. If she had been a terrorist with a fake pass, you'd be giving me a medal right now. I was protecting the ship." Vivian didn't speak. She just watched him, her fingers steepled together. "Protecting the ship," Vivian repeated softly. "Is that what you call it, Mr. Sterling?" "Yes, ma'am," Sterling said, trying to regain his command voice. "I have 30 years of unblemished service. I have a perfect safety record. You can't fire me for being cautious." "Unblemished," Vivian echoed. She looked at the stack of files in front of her. "That's an interesting word, because when I asked for your file, HR initially sent me the official one. It was very thin, just commendations and flight logs." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "But then," she continued, "I had my forensic accounting team audit the HR internal server, specifically the suppressed complaints folder. Do you know what we found, Richard?" Sterling blinked. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. "I don't know what you're talking about." "We found Jessica Reynolds," Vivian said. The name hit the room like a physical blow. Sterling flinched visibly. Jessica Reynolds, Vivian read from a file, was a first officer in 2019, a promising pilot. She filed a formal complaint against you, stating that you repeatedly referred to her as stewardess in the cockpit, refused to let her perform landings during her rotation, and when she objected, you wrote a performance review claiming she was emotionally unstable and unfit for command. She was unstable. Sterling shouted, his face reddening. She cried in the cockpit. She cried, Vivian corrected, because you poured hot coffee on her hand accidentally during turbulence and then laughed about it. A witness statement from a flight attendant confirmed it. But that statement, it vanished. Vivian pulled out another sheet. And then there's Michael Chang, a ground crew chief. You reported him for insubordination and had his security clearance revoked because he asked you to wait 5 minutes for refueling. He lost his job. He has 3 kids, Richard. She tossed the papers onto the table. They slid across the mahogany surface, stopping right in front of Sterling. And finally, Vivian said, her voice turning to ice, Sarah, the flight attendant you berated on my flight. You threatened her job because she wouldn't enforce your bias. That isn't safety, Captain. That is tyranny. These are old allegations, O'Connor, the union rep, argued, though he looked less confident now. They were settled. You can't bring up past matters to justify a termination for the current event. I can, Vivian said, standing up, because the company policy regarding gross misconduct and creating a hostile work environment has no statute of limitations when fraud is involved, and concealment of evidence is fraud. She turned to the screen on the wall. I have one more witness. Connect him. The screen flickered to life. It was a video call. A man in his 50s appeared sitting in a home office. He looked nervous. It was Gregory Hines, the former VP of HR, the man who had protected Sterling for years. Mr. Hines, Vivian said, you are under oath. Yes, Dr. Clark, Hines said, his voice trembling. Did Captain Sterling ever personally request that you delete or suppress complaints against him in exchange for favors? Sterling jumped up. Greg, don't you say a word. This is entrapment. Sit down, the general counsel barked. Hines looked at Sterling, then at Vivian. He looked defeated. Yes, Richard. Captain Sterling, he gave me friends and family unlimited flight passes. In exchange, I moved his complaints to the inactive archive. I protected him. The room went dead silent. The union rep, Frank O'Connor, slowly closed his folder. He looked at Sterling with disgust. He knew the battle was over. Bribery and record tampering were not things the union could defend. You sold your integrity for free flights, Vivian said, shaking her head. Mr. Hines, you will be hearing from our legal department regarding your severance clawback. Goodbye. The screen went black. Vivian looked down at Sterling. He was slumped in his chair, a broken man. The facade of the hero pilot had been stripped away, leaving only a small, vindictive bully exposed to the light. Richard Sterling, Vivian announced formally. Your employment with Monarch Airlines is terminated effective immediately for cause. We are stripping you of your pension due to gross misconduct and fraud. We are also reporting these findings to the FAA and the Civil Aviation Authority. You will likely never fly a commercial aircraft again. Sterling looked up, tears in his eyes. My pension. But that's my life. I have a mortgage. I have alimony. You can't take my pension. You took Michael Chang's livelihood, Vivian said. You took Jessica Reynolds' career. You tried to take my dignity. The balance is merely being restored. She pointed to the door. Security will escort you out. Do not return to any Monarch property. Sterling stood up. His legs were shaky. He looked at O'Connor for help, but the union rep turned his back on him. He looked at his lawyer, who was busy packing his briefcase, clearly realizing his client couldn't pay him anymore. Sterling walked to the door, alone. 3 months later. The wind whipped across the observation deck of JFK Airport, but inside the terminal the mood was warm and buzzing with energy. Dr. Vivian Clark stood at the podium of Gate 42, the same gate where she had been humiliated. But today the gate was adorned with balloons and a large banner, Monarch Airline's New Horizons initiative. Behind her stood a diverse group of pilots and crew members. Among them was Captain Jessica Reynolds, who had been rehired and promoted to chief pilot of the 777 fleet. Beside her was Sarah, now the director of in-flight services. Vivian leaned into the microphone. A crowd of press and passengers listened intently. 3 months ago, Vivian began, her voice echoing through the terminal. I was told I didn't belong on this plane. I was judged not by my ticket, but by my appearance. That moment was painful, but it was necessary. It revealed a crack in our foundation. She smiled at the crowd. Today I am proud to announce the Open Skies Scholarship. Monarch Airlines is committing $50 million to train pilots and crew from underrepresented communities. We are not just flying passengers anymore. We are lifting barriers. The crowd erupted in applause, but miles away in a cramped apartment in Queens, the applause was not heard. Richard Sterling sat in a worn-out armchair, staring at the TV. The broadcast showed Vivian cutting a ribbon. He looked older, grayer. His life had unraveled with terrifying speed. After the firing, the news cycle had been merciless. The viral villain pilot became a meme. His face was everywhere. His wife of 20 years, tired of his temper and the sudden financial ruin, had filed for divorce 2 weeks after the hearing. The friends he thought he had in the industry stopped answering his calls. Even the local flight school where he applied to be an instructor turned him down. They didn't want the bad PR. He took a sip of cheap whiskey. His phone buzzed. It was a notification from his bank insufficient funds. He looked back at the TV. He saw Sarah smiling, pinning a wing on a young cadet. He saw the world moving on without him, better without him. He turned off the TV, sitting in the silence of his own making. He had tried to protect his small, exclusive kingdom, and in doing so he had exiled himself from it forever. Back at the airport, Vivian finished her speech and walked down the jet bridge. She was flying to Tokyo today, economy class, just to check on the service. As she boarded, the young flight attendant at the door smiled. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Clark. Seat 34A. "That's me." Vivian smiled. "Let me help you with your bag," the attendant said. "I've got it," Vivian said, hoisting it easily. "We're all in this together." She walked down the aisle, no longer the anomaly, but the architect. The plane pushed back, the engines roared, and Monarch Airlines took flight, finally truly soaring. And that, my friends, is how you handle a bully. Captain Sterling thought his uniform gave him the right to judge, but he forgot the most important rule of the sky turbulence hits everyone, especially those who create it. Dr. Clark didn't just get revenge, she got justice. She took a moment of humiliation and turned it into a movement that changed an entire industry, while Sterling was left grounded in the wreckage of his own ego. It's a powerful reminder: never judge a book by its cover, and definitely never judge a passenger by their seat number, because they might just own the plane. If you enjoyed this story of high-flying justice and instant karma smash, that like button. It really helped the channel grow. And if you want more stories about entitled people getting exactly what they deserve, hit subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss an upload. What would you have done if you were Vivian? Would you have fired him or given him a second chance? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, Stay safe and keep flying high.